Let's have a chat now about 1917, the year of revolutions. Two revolutions, February and October, the second being the Bolshevik Revolution. And I'd like to start with a source. And the source is this one. It's a poster created slightly after 1917 in about 1919 by opponents of the Bolshevik Revolution. You would have run across this in a previous flip video and done a little bit of work with it, but probably had asked more questions than it answered when you did that. You'll also see it in a number of the resources in our notes because it's such a rich primary source. So, this is a piece of propaganda from the Russian Civil War. It's got a few clues in it that we need to pick up on straight away, and let's talk through how I'd annotate this. First off, I go to the caption, and I go to the source, and then let that guide me into the imagery of the source itself. I pick up on the title. This time, it's actually in the source details. I know it's a poster that's created in the Civil War from the context, and I've said that earlier. But the title of the poster is Sacrifice to the International. Now, the word international in the Cyrillic alphabet appears in the main caption, in this bottom portion of the frame here, but it also appears here on this brick-type structure, which we'll talk about soon. The question's raised then, if this is a sacrifice, who is the sacrifice being made by, and who is this international that the sacrifice is being made to? I then look at this brick structure and I think about it as being an altar-type structure, some sort of sacrificial altar where a person is being sacrificed. Who or what are they being sacrificed to? Well, we've got here a bust or an idol of a false god, if you like. I've already told you it's opposed to the Bolsheviks, and that would be the face of Karl Marx. So there's Marx. I recognize him from images, and I can apply him to this figure here. There's his face and beard and so on. Now, does that reconcile and fit nicely with the knowledge that we have, with the content knowledge we have? The idea that Marxism is internationalist, does not believe in nations and borders, fits nicely with this idea of the international. Now, there's further Marxist ideas around that word, the international, but it certainly does indicate to us that we're on the right track. Let's see what else we can get here. This red star image comes up repeatedly. I've marked it 3 times, so it's actually about 5 or 6 times in the cartoon. It appears in the hats of characters, it appears in background scenes and so on. So the red star is fairly significant. Let's see what else is in red. This main character in the center here is significant, and I again am recognizing the fellow's face. I can see him over here again. Hopefully you recognized him correctly as Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks. So this fits nicely with the idea it's Bolsheviks who are making a sacrifice of this figure to a false god being Karl Marx and Marxism. Notice here, Bolshevik leader Lenin is the high priest of this sacrifice, this sacrificial offering, this sort of black mass, if you like, and he's wearing red. So again, red, the colour of Bolshevism coming through. Standing with him, and hopefully you recognise his face again, is Leon Trotsky. Here he is here. Leon Trotsky is depicted as the butcher with the blood-stained apron, the sword and knives on his belt, and the dagger in his hand, plunging the sword into the victim here. Trotsky, as leader of the Red Guards, as leader of the Bolshevik Revolution, is represented as the killer, as the butcher, and that again fits nicely with all of the other imagery we've got so far. Everyone around them we've now identified is in some way a Bolshevik. Some of them are named, some of them are not. We've got Bolsheviks generally in the background here, all worshipping at this altar of the false god of Marxism, of the internationalism of Marxism, the international itself. Now, a couple of little things I've picked up in here. Firstly, I'd like you to see that the faces of some of these figures have got that receding hair, hooked nose, beard that you might associate from grade 10 with an anti-Semitic stereotype, anti-Jewish stereotype that was very common in the first half of the 20th century in places like Germany. Interestingly, we have a bag here with the number 30 on it. Now, this is where you'd usually have to do a little bit of investigation, and you might have been a bit stumped. It's a reference to the idea that a famous Jew, Judas, betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver that led to his crucifixion. Now, this is again getting at this sense of Jews being betrayers of something sacred. Okay, so this is a religious sacrifice now, and the figure here is almost Christ-like. Over here in this front corner, we've got the Red Guard, the Red Army, often dressed in black, drawn with Asiatic features, Asian features, and that's because during the war, the Civil War, many of the Bolshevik armies enlisted troops from the eastern parts of Russia, and they were often of Asian appearance, Siberian and so on. A reference to a sailor here. During the revolutionary events of October 1917, the Aurora, a cruiser, a Russian naval vessel, was heavily involved in the events. So there is the suggestion here that the Bolsheviks are supported by traitorous, ugly, depraved, if you like, sailors and soldiers, those who are racially less pure, perhaps. So racism is coming through this. There are Cyrillic alphabet words running across the top here. They go all the way across over significant features. I don't think it would take you too long to say that maybe we're supposed to recognize other figures here besides Lenin and Trotsky. And you'd be right. For example, Trotsky is labeled here above in the Cyrillic alphabet. You might even, with a quite little bit of a squint, see how we can arrive at the word Trotsky out of those letters. Lenin, you can see arriving out of there. This man here with that beard and so on, you might recognize the word Kamenev, and Kamenev was another leading Bolshevik. So we're nearly there. We've got Bolsheviks and their armies and their sailors who are obviously traitorous, betraying Christ-like figures here, making a sacrifice to Marxism. So that leaves us to think about who that figure is, and she is a female character, as you can tell from her physique. She is the image of Mother Russia. Mother Russia is wearing the Tsarist crown. She's dressed in white. The idea of her being in white, being female, gets the idea of virginal and pure. This is like the imagery that we have of a virgin being sacrificed to a volcano. She is the sacrificed, a Christ-like sacrifice, suffering so that we might all live. So we've got Mother Russia being sacrificed by evil, godless, traitorous, Jew-inspired Bolsheviks on the altar of a false god of Karl Marx. It is an image that is demonizing in so many different ways the Bolsheviks, pointing out their betrayal of everything that is pure and good about Russia. A European, think of the racial messages, Christian, female, Christ-like figure being destroyed by the atheist internationalists of Marxism. A really powerful image, one that you can come back to and think over quite a bit. It sets us up nicely to think about what then happened in 1917. How do we arrive at images such as this? And this wasn't unusual during the Civil War period. Let's now quickly talk about an overview of the revolutions of 1917. 1917 starts as a year where Russia is experiencing continued defeats in World War I. The Tsarist regime has refused to reform itself. In fact, has become more repressive. It's had a bitter winter. So winter in Russia is lasting from about October, November through to about March. It's a bitter winter with huge blizzards, which have disrupted food supplies, disrupted rail links and transport and communications. There have been strikes, there's rising unemployment, there's demands for suffrage rights, including those of women. So Russia is in a crisis at the start of 1917. And Petrograd, St. Petersburg, the capital of Russia, is the focal point of national attention. The February Revolution in that winter of 1917 was a revolution led by the middle-class aristocratic groups within the Duma. There's a desire for reform. The liberalism, the sense of freedom that grew out of the French Revolution, is being called for in Russia about 100 years later. There's a desire for increased suffrage, a change to the voting rights of the Duma. There's also calls from the aristocratic military officer class for a change in the way in which the Tsar is running the war against the Germans. The Duma takes a list of demands in February to Tsar Nicholas II, who rejects their demands and in fact dismisses the Duma. Says to the Fourth Duma, "You have no more right to meet." And just like the Third Estate going to the tennis court in 1789 in France, the Duma refuses to disband. They form a provisional committee to run the government until a full election can be held for a new constitutional assembly. The Tsar abdicates in this moment. The provisional government is formed and plans are started to make a vote for a new government of a Republican Russia. At the same time as this provisional government is formed, the Petrograd Soviet is formed. Now, a Soviet is a Russian word for a committee of workers, soldiers, sailors. It's a committee-led group, if you like, almost a club. Soviets are formed all across Russia's towns and cities by workers' groups. So from March to September 1917, it's the provisional government preparing to have a vote for a constitutional assembly and new parliament that has power to make law, but not actually power on the streets of Russia without the support of the Soviet workers' committees. Alexander Kerensky, the leader of the provisional government, tries to sit on the fence. He is the only member of the provisional government who is also a member of the Petrograd Soviet. He's a socialist in an organisation, the provisional government, full of liberals and aristocrats. Okay? At exactly this time that Kerensky is sort of trying to please both sides with little hope of success, the Bolshevik Party, the Marxist revolutionaries, are expanding their influence and control over these Soviets. And they actually form military units of the workers called Red Guards. The leaders of the Bolshevik Party are caught unaware. Both of them are out of the country at the time of this first revolution, the February Revolution. They rush back to Russia as the events unfold. And Lenin makes a very, very famous speech to the Petrograd Soviet known as the April Theses. Theses, by the way, ideas. In the April Theses, he makes a number of key statements. The most important one is that the Soviets are directed, and the Bolsheviks are directed, in no way to cooperate with the provisional government, to not work with the bourgeoisie revolution, to resist it, to overthrow it. Lenin also makes clear in a series of street meetings that the Bolsheviks have three aims for the people in the slogan, peace, bread, land. His other statement is all power to the Soviets, by which he means all power to the working classes, not to the provisional government. Throughout July, there are numerous attempted coups. There are at least 3 Bolshevik-led attempts at taking power off the provisional government that all fail. And there is one right-wing coup, the Kornilov affair, the Kornilov uprising, where an aristocratic general tries a military takeover of the provisional government. It also fails. And what Lenin learns from these is that the army is prepared to stay on the sidelines while these uprisings take place. By October 1917, the Bolsheviks are in a position where they are ready to strike and seize power. And we have our October Revolution. Now get your head around it, different calendar for Russia and the West. So the October Revolution takes place on the early morning hours of November 7th. October Revolution, when? November 7th. Okay, the Bolsheviks seize power in Petrograd and the provisional government ends. Red Guards, led by Trotsky, our butcher in the Sacrifice International cartoon, seized strategic positions in Petrograd, and that taking of strategic positions and power is mirrored across all the towns and cities, all the major installations of Russia. The Bolsheviks meet little resistance in Petrograd, but have to really struggle in some places such as Moscow to take power. At this stage, the Russian military divides into those who align themselves with the Bolsheviks, the Reds, and the White faction, those who are anti-Bolshevik. And they have all sorts of motivations. But we now have the Reds and the Whites, and these are the two sides of our civil war starting to be able to be identified. So that background there will help us to really understand sources such as these. The very famous Comrade Lenin cleanses the filth of the world, with Lenin at the top in his workers' cap and a red broom of revolution sweeping away the monarchs of the world. It's international, the bourgeoisie, and the church. We also have images such as Trotsky slaying the counter-revolutionary dragon. Here he is depicted as a St. George type hero, a saintly type figure, killing the capitalist serpent, devil, Satan. And in the final image, we have our Bolsheviks starting to be portrayed as these heroes, these giant figures looming over the government of Russia at this stage. So that's given you an overview of 1917, and I think set us up for the Civil War period.